is something that most people don't know much about. They think it was to help the farmers. Well, actually, most farmers did not like the idea of the daylight savings time and did not support it back then and don't really support it now to a large extent. Because think about it, for them, it totally messes with their workday. It makes them potentially work later into the day during the hours of sunlight, while the non-farmer gets to recreate or enjoy the time in the daylight after work to do fun stuff outdoors, whether it be hiking, biking, surfing, or whatever the case may be, right? So anyway, the history of daylight saving time, not daylight savings time, like many of us say, including myself, often misspeak and call it daylight savings time. Well, it's actually not that at all. It's called daylight saving time. And they called it that to kind of save the hours of the day, if you will, to be able to get more done. And this historically is often credited to, yes, the one and only Benjamin Franklin, although he was not really the first one to talk about it. And in fact, even the Romans way back when, they actually changed the time, if you will, during the summer season to be able to benefit them and to have a longer day. They even adjusted their water clocks. And this was a little bit different than the classic daylight saving time that we're used to. But in any case, this whole idea concept has been around much longer than many of us think. Most of us think back to, the adage that Benjamin Franklin used to always share with people: early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise, which I don't disagree with. I actually think it's great to get up early. Better yet, to get up naturally with the sunrise, I think, is outstanding. And when we do daylight saving time, it actually messes with that because we often have to get up before the sunrise, at least for the first several weeks or even months, until things kind of shape up a bit with the days that are lengthening into the summer, etc. But in any case, Benjamin Franklin, way back when in the 1770s and 80s, was credited to having spent some time in Paris. He was an ambassador and got to observe a lot of the stuff that was going on. And he just felt like they stayed in bed too long. They didn't get up and take advantage of the daylight hours. And so he is often credited with proposing daylight saving time, though it wasn't actually him. Most people will actually look at an entomologist from New Zealand by the name of George Hudson, who first talked about it because he wanted to actually, he did shift work, kind of like I do oftentimes working in the hospital. He did shift work, but in a different way. He was studying insects and he wanted to have more time to do that. He actually liked his work. He wanted to study later into the day. So he kind of proposed the first daylight saving time in 1895. He presented this paper to the Wellington Philosophical Society, and he wanted to have a 2-hour daylight shift. And this was in the Christchurch area of New Zealand. And some people favored it, some people did not. William Willett, who is a builder and outdoorsman, he was also in a similar era, and he has been traditionally given credit for making this a more standardized thing back in 1907, when he was in London, kind of recognizing that a lot of folks kept their shutters down in the morning. They didn't like getting up with the daylight. And he just thought that was a waste. He's like, why not get out there and be doing stuff? And he also, interestingly enough, the story goes, he liked to golf. And so he wanted to continue to have this privilege and opportunity to be able to golf after the end of his workday. So that was a funny kind of nuance about how he, Mr. William Willett, kind of independently came up with this idea of daylight saving time in the 1907 timeframe and introduced a bill to the House of Commons in February of 1908. And he lobbied for this until he died in 1915. They didn't get it passed. The first to officially pass it was Ontario, Canada, the Port Arthur area, and that was in the 1908 timeframe. And in the US, we didn't really get into it until the First World War, where it was kind of a common idea that we needed to both be able to produce more food for for those that were fighting for our country. And we needed to also save energy, right? Save electricity, gas, candles, whatever it was that we were using to lighting our homes back then during the time of the First World War. And so this proposition that had been initially used way back when, at the time of the Romans, Benjamin Franklin talked about it. Then in the early 20th century, 1908, as we talked about, In the House of Commons, it was talked about, as well as in Ontario, Canada, when it was first enacted in 1908. This didn't really happen in the US until the First World War, where during the wartime, we adopted daylight saving time for the first time here in the US. Although it didn't last long. It lasted, I think it was maybe even less than a year. It was enacted in 1918 and implemented just during the time of war to conserve energy resources. And it didn't last long. It was, I think, even less than an actual 12-month period that it was enacted. It was repealed a year later. And then it was enacted a second time during the Second World War, also for the same kind of general reason, to conserve energy, electricity, and also to potentially grow more food for the soldiers, if you will. But then again, it was stopped after the Second World War and didn't really come into sort of a national level consistently until the Uniform Time Act in 1966. And then later, when I was in my infancy in 1974, we enacted kind of a permanent daylight saving time. And so it's been a long road. It's been interesting. It wasn't the story that you probably may have heard here in the US historically. It was during the First and Second World Wars that we did this for a time, and then it was more standardized by the time of 1974. So it's actually a fairly new thing that we've done consistently. And we're going to talk about today whether or not it's good or whether or not it's bad. As I alluded to at the outset, most farmers, contrary to popular belief, have actually traditionally been against the daylight saving time for the reasons that I alluded to, because for them, they actually have to work later into the day, right, to optimize the hours of the sun. And also the work that they do on the farm, as they firsthand recognize the animals don't adopt the new clock, if you will. They do their thing based on the natural solar clock, which is our natural circadian rhythm, right? We are designed and have been for millennia to interact with our environment, to be able to recognize the light and the dark cycles. And that is our primary stimulus to be able to set our own rhythm, our so-called circadian rhythm, which primarily is set by the sun or sunlight. And so I often have been quoted to say, and I'll say this ad nauseum till the day I die, one of my most helpful tips, tricks, and tools to sleeping great, outstanding during the night is starting my day off with natural light, with daylight, getting outside in those first minutes and hours of the day to be able to expose my eyes, my retina to natural light. And that helps set the clock, if you will, in my body, my circadian clock, to be able to adapt best to daylight saving. Now, there's a lot of data out there, and it's, I think, pretty well understood that at least in the initial change, which is actually happening this weekend. I'm going to give you some tools to hopefully prepare for that, since you'll have a day or two from the time this podcast comes out before the actual changing or advancing, right? The springing forward of our clocks early Sunday morning to help you be able to better adapt, adjust, and be able to make that accommodation in your own life to optimize this change. Because unless you live in Hawaii or most of Arizona or the US Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, most of us, at least in the US, are going to have to deal with the upcoming weekend of advancing our clocks by 1 hour for the so-called daylight saving time. And we can't change that probably before the weekend. If you want to get political, there are some acts out there to be able to end this once and for all. But actually, the one that's been more popular is to preserve it forever, to always stay in daylight saving time, the so-called Sunshine Act, which it sounds kind of good because then you just stay in that forever, but it's actually not the most natural to be able to do. And it involves what we're talking about this weekend. We're losing an hour of sleep. Right now, present day, almost 50% of us, 115 million people here in the US, 300 some odd million population. So almost half of our population right now consistently suffers from sleep deprivation. Right now, present day, about 50% of us, 1 out of 2 of us, already struggles with sleep deprivation. You add on right now this weekend, or should I say subtract an hour of our normal sleepy time and advance the clocks, we lose that hour. That's going to potentially create more issues with sleep deprivation. And there's been numerous data, numerous studies on the myriad of effects of sleep deprivation on us as humans, and it's not good. Let's just jump to the the final answer, if you will, when you are sleep deprived, it affects negatively just about every system in the body. It's actually inflammatory as well, causes increased inflammation, it messes with your hormones. The two that I think of most often, which are really important hormones, the human growth hormone and testosterone, primarily are released at night while we're sleeping. If we're not getting adequate sleep, both of those levels will potentially drop and we won't be able to perform at our best, both men and women, because most people don't know this, but actually testosterone, even in women, is super important. In fact, the level, if you actually take the microgram level of testosterone, it is higher than any other hormone in women. Estrogen is actually lower than testosterone. Testosterone is actually the highest of the so-called sex hormones, if you will, in the body that women have, and also men have. Their levels, of course, are lower than men, but their level of testosterone should be higher than their level of estrogen. And most people have no idea. They don't even think about testosterone in women, but it's super important, especially want to have a super healthy functioning metabolism. You want to gain muscle so that you have the best well-oiled machine, if you will, your metabolic machinery that helps you to have energy, to thrive in life. You need to have muscle mass. To have muscle mass, you've got to have testosterone. Testosterone also gives you that chutzpah, that energized ability to have that energy throughout the day, not only to be able to be energized, when you want to be, at night with your partner or whatnot, but to be able to have energy throughout the day. Testosterone is super important in women and men, and the levels go down rapidly when you don't sleep. In fact, there was a study several years now ago that was done looking at just subtracting 1 hour out of people's sleep and seeing what that did to testosterone levels. And it dropped them by about 15%, which doesn't sound huge, but when you consider looking at the numbers, that would drop your level down low enough to advance your years, if you will, to about 10 to 15 years in life. In other words, you would be older, 10 to 15 years older, biologically speaking, with respect to that testosterone level, with just losing 1 hour of sleep. And this was shown quite quickly. This happened readily in just 1 week of time frame. So it's a huge negative effector on your testosterone, on your human growth hormone when you don't sleep. And so right now, this weekend, we're potentially going to get sleep deprived because we're missing a full hour of sleep. And there's tons of data on increased incidence of heart attacks over the weekend that the time changes. And this isn't anything typical about light and dark, if you will. Their bodies aren't saying, oh, we're just going to have more heart attacks now because it's dark in the morning and it used to be light. If, for example, like right now, when I get my kids off to school at 7 a.m., they're getting on the bus to go to school. It's light outside, which is actually kind of fun. It's actually really annoying when I have to wake them up. Well, I still have to wake them up in the dark because we get up early enough to be able to prepare everything, get their lunches, get their breakfast, their eggs, bacon, what have you in the morning. That takes a little bit of time. If you got tips and tricks to how to make eggs and bacon a little bit quicker and still have it fresh and whatever, let me know. But that just takes a little bit of time in the morning. And so I'm still getting them up in the dark. But by the time we're actually catching the bus, it's daylight, it's bright. And when it's reflecting off that snow, it's super bright, like my girls shared with me this morning, which is actually kind of fun. But that's all going to change on Monday when we've lost an hour, right? We've advanced that clock. So now when it is, 6 a.m., if you will, or when it was 6 a.m., it'll now be 7. And so it'll still be that darker time frame. We're losing that, if you will, in the mornings in our school prep. They're going to get on the bus again in the dark, which is not awesome. Yes, there's been lots of studies showing in that first weekend there's more car crashes because people are driving in the dark to work where they weren't potentially a week earlier. They're getting less sleep, which negatively affects the heart, your cardiovascular health. I presented this, a couple of years ago when I did one of my first podcasts on sleep. We talked a lot about how sleep can help you, right? It can help you be the most rested, rejuvenated, restorative process that you could ever do, right? It enhances what's called autophagy, which is that self-cleaning, regenerative phase that only happens effectively while we're sleeping and not eating. And when you cut a whole hour out of that, potentially you're not getting into that as easily, and it can adversely affect your health. And I presented 2 papers way back when I talked about sleep in one of my earlier podcasts, how it can negatively impact your cardiovascular health, literally taking time off your life, years off your life, if you are chronically sleep deprived. Both from a cardiovascular point of view, you'll have increased incidence of heart attack and cardiac related death. Also, the brain, which we care a lot about, especially now that the awareness is up, which is amazing, about the dementias, Alzheimer's and others, neurovascular dementias, all the dementias out there can decrease in frequency if we sleep better. And they increase in frequency, sadly, when we don't get enough sleep. So lots of reasons to make sure you're getting adequate sleep. And like I said, right now, present day, most of us can't do a lot about losing this hour coming up this weekend. But what we can do is we can prepare for that. And so one of the things I'd recommend is start going to bed a little bit earlier, especially do so on Saturday night. Try to go to bed an hour earlier Saturday night. If you can, Friday night, go to bed half an hour earlier, kind of work up to this, get to bed a little bit earlier so that you can still get your roughly 7 to 8 hours of sleep. In fact, there's this, it's not a prescription, if you will. Everybody's a little bit different. I thrive around 7 hours. A lot of people thrive at around 8, maybe 8.5. For many years, I thought I was thriving on 5 to 6, and there's some people that actually do pretty well on 6 hours of sleep. But most of us, it's closer to the 7 to 8 hour range. So make sure we're getting that and getting that consistently and getting that in a quality way. It's not just hours in the cot, if you will. It's effective and efficient in the way that it needs to be quality. And one of the best ways I know to do that is start your mornings right with bright light in the morning. So get up when the sun comes up. And I'm going to be experiencing this weekend because I'm traveling eastward. So I'm going to be losing more than just that 1 hour. I'm going to be losing 3 hours because I'm moving from the mountain time zone to the eastern time zone. I'm going to lose 2 hours there plus the hour on Saturday night or early Sunday morning, if you will. 3 hours I'm going to be losing. So I'm going to try to get to bed earlier in preparation for that, make sure I'm getting my 7 to 8 hours. And then when I get to the East Coast, I'm going to be there for a week working there in Florida. I'll try to get my 8 hours of sleep if I can, because it's so helpful and useful. And the best way I know to do that is starting the day right with that light exposure when the sun comes up. So get up when the sun rises. If you have a chance to do a walk, slip off your shoes, do some grounding, like I'm going to try to do in Florida, right? Florida. I'm going to try to get out with a pair of board shorts on, walk on the beach in the morning, maybe even surf if the waves are working. I hope I can do that. The water's going to be cold. It's around 60 right now, which is not amazing. I'm used to the 80s of Hawaii or high 70s. But hey, I'm going to get out in there, try to get my grounding in. We talked about that a bit recently. But starting your day off right with some natural light is amazing. And also in the evening, one of the next, I think, most powerful things is having a wind down ritual. Most of us are go, 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 go throughout the day, and we don't set aside, roughly an hour to kind of ease and wind down, to have this ritual where we can kind of mellow out at night, which is super important because we're trying to, go to bed at whatever that hour is. 10 o'clock in my case is kind of my goal for bedtime, but it doesn't always happen. But I aim for that. But that means I have to at least start my prep around 9 p.m. So I got to get my kids to bed. My goal is try to get them to bed around 8, my older kids around 9. And then I kind of ease into my routine by dimming the lights a bit in the house, turning off the boob tube or the computer work, cell phone blue light exposure, if you will. Try to read a book I got this red headlamps, emits red light, which is a more calming wavelength of light. It's not going to keep you activated and alert. Or you can get some blue blocker glasses if you're into that. They may be helpful. But decreasing your screen time at night is super important. Eating earlier in the evening. Try to have a 3-hour window before you go to bed where you're not eating. So try to have dinner at least 3 hours before you hit the hay. I found it to be super helpful because when I eat late, almost universally, I don't sleep that awesome. I might get to sleep because I'm kind of tired after I get that postprandial, as we call it in Hawaii, the Polynesian paralysis that's occurring after you eat a meal. But then I wake up kind of with an upset stomach, and that might be a couple hours later if I eat too late in the evening. So eat earlier, have the so-called food curfew 3 hours before bed, have a device curfew at least 1 hour before bed. That's kind of my personal goal. Ideally 2 hours before bed. If you could shut off all the blue lights, amazing. Most of us just can't do that with our busy life. So if you can do 1 hour or even start with 30 minutes, go for it. I think that's super helpful. But you got to have a food curfew, a blue light curfew, and then a wind down ritual, whether that be a hot bath, whether that be time in the hot tub, whether that be reading a book, writing a gratitude journal, whatever that wind down, listening to music, chatting with your partner, just, whatever you can do to kind of ease that just amped up, self that you might have been throughout the day. In my case, I'm living the day pretty amped up, whether it be through doing work or being outdoors with my kids, hitting those big giant snowboarding and ski jumps that I've shared on Instagram, whatever it is. I'm fairly amped up during the day, but I like to ease into my evening so I can have a restful night's sleep with about a 1 hour ritual where I turn off the blue light devices, all of them. I ease into my evening. I usually read a book. I do some journaling. I chat with my kids. We have kind of a wind down time. We get together. We usually read together each night as a family. We're doing that with a little bit dimmer lights. We're not having the TV on, and it's a nice family connection time because I've been reminded of this lately. There's actually a lot of new data. There's even a study that came out of Brigham Young University in the last couple of years looking at decrease in all-cause mortality, 50% decrease in all-cause mortality with having good social connections, good framework, whether it be with your family, your friends, those that you care about. You have good connections, what I like to call the vitamin C of late, right? Having good connection. It basically is a 50% reduction in all-cause mortality, everything from cardiovascular death, stroke, whatever it may be. Having good both familial, friend connections, even with your pets, like that pumps up this amazing rest hormone called oxytocin, the so-called cuddle hormone. It's the anti-stress hormone. I talk about this ad nauseum in a few podcasts I did on stress. How it's literally the antidote to stress is oxytocin, and that goes up with personal connection with other people, connection with our favorite feline and canine friends. It amps up this amazing restful hormone called oxytocin. So take advantage of that. Cuddle with your favorite friend, partner, spouse, whatever, kids. I love to. My wife's been out of town lately, and I've been snuggling with my kids at night. We'll read together, like I mentioned. On the weekends, we'll watch a movie together, and I'll have one kid around this arm, another kid around this arm, and sometimes they're fighting over who can be there, during the movie or during dinner. I usually have my girls on either side of me when I eat dinner. It's so fun to have that familial connection as often as we can. Even recent studies looking at eating together as a family, both for kids and adults, is super helpful for a couple of reasons. You traditionally, when you eat together as a family, not only are you having this vitamin C of connection, releasing the oxytocin, which helps relax you, helps you have this positive framework that decreases stress, decreases inflammation, but also you tend to eat better, healthier foods, less, ultra processed foods when you eat together, minimum 3 nights a week as a family. It's pretty easy. That's not even half of the night. So shoot for at least 3 nights a week. We shoot for most nights, 5 to 7 nights a week. We usually have a family dinner, and it's been an amazing time for our family to amp up that vitamin C for connection, do a little cuddling. I usually have one kid on either side. We talk story about, in Hawaii, we call it walalau, of what happened during the day, and just kind of make some beautiful connections, usually over the dinner table, which just makes it not only enjoyable, but a lot of fun. And typically it's over some fresh food that we've just made. So I hope these things can be helpful to you. Try to get to bed a little earlier, have a food curfew, a blue light curfew, have a nice easing evening ritual that eases you into that evening time, and make sure at all costs that you still shoot for your 7 or 8 hours of sleep, even when you'll lose this hour over the weekend. If you're living in the continental US, it's just going to happen. Like, don't be upset about it. Do your best to optimize it by using these steps that I've mentioned, both here in this podcast and also other podcasts that I've done on sleep, because there's so many helpful things. I even have, it's at least one chapter, maybe even 2 or 3 chapters in the book where I talk about sleep and how it's so powerful, yet so simple. It doesn't have to be rocket science. You don't have to understand all the ebbs and flows of the hormones. Just know that sleep is important. You can't wait to sleep until you're dead. So I hope this is helpful for you. Tackle this weekend. It's going to be amazing. I love you guys and gals for being here, part of this movement, sharing this time with me. I hope this can be helpful. Make sure you share this out, share it out with a friend, a family member, who's having questions about daylight savings, having questions about sleep, what have you. I haven't even mentioned all the other things about food, but obviously you eat the best food, real, whole, single ingredient foods. There's some things that can kind of help you in the evening time. You can reach out to me if you want to know supplement wise what I take to help me sleep. I'd be happy to. My favorite is magnesium. It's the mighty mineral that has so many benefits, but I'm always having magnesium right before bedtime. Magnesium 3 and 8 is my favorite, but message me if you want more specifics on my supplement regime, because it is not only helpful for sleep, but in every aspect of my life. Because until next time, a big aloha. Thanks for watching, and make sure to like, subscribe, and share with a friend. These podcasts take hours of research, and taking just 2 seconds of your life to hit the like, subscribe, and share button will help a ton and get this word out to help more and more people. Thanks in advance. Mahalo and aloha.